bloody attempt number 3. Hey guys, I wanted to go ahead and make an audio and video record of the rules changes we're using for Dungeonpunk 3.5. And if you are someone I've not met in the flesh and you're using my guide to run your own kind of Dungeonpunk game, this could be helpful for you too. The biggest change in Dungeonpunk is the fate saving throw and the confirming dice for dramatic success. And we're going to talk about those two things a little bit today. We're going to start by talking about the confirming die throw. We do not use confirming dice for combat. Combat is run just like 3.0 and 3.5 says. If we monkey with that too much, it's been my experience, even by using things from the 3.0 and 3.5 Dungeon Master guides, that you throw combat all off. I've seen way too many critical hits by using the plus 10 target number rule that's in the DMG. It's just too much, the way the combat system has been engineered. But for skills, I always found 3.0 and 3.5 lacking because either you succeeded or you failed. There was no degree of success. And I really like games that have a degree of success system. It makes you feel, as a player and as a GM, more rewarding when a roll is so high or so low that it helps you narrate the results of that very low or very high roll with dramatic action. So to start off with, we have this open range now on dice throws, just like a weapon would have in D&D combat, called confirming dice. And the range for that's called the dramatic success range. And if you look at this table right here, it shows the level of the character that's rolling and what their drama range is. Character 1 to 6 levels, drama range is a 20, 5% chance. Character level 7 to 12, drama range is 19 to 20, 10% chance. 13 to 18 levels, 18 to 20, that's a 15% chance. And at 19 levels or better, 17 to 20, the maximum the range ever drops normally, and that's a 20% chance for dramatic success. Now, please be advised, there are feats that make this range go lower. The two feats I put into the game are Skill Mastery and Legendary Skill Mastery, and they read as follows. Skill Mastery. You need 5 ranks in the chosen skill. The open roll range with the chosen skill is reduced by 1. So if you take this right away, let's say you're playing a thief and put it on your hide at levels 1 to 6 would have a 10% chance to critically succeed. That's huge. Skill Mastering Legendary requires you have 10 ranks in the chosen skill, but this one allows you to, once a session with that skill, force a confirming die, even if you didn't roll in the natural range, and that's huge. Players often use this to save their Kissed by Fate uses, and you are limited, although you can take Skill Mastery as many times as you like, you're limited to taking Legendary Skill Mastery only 3 times. Each time you take one of these feats, it must be applied to a different skill. You can't stack it on one skill. Sorry. So what's a confirming die? A confirming die, just like confirming a critical hit, is a second d20 that is rolled. But rather than try to beat the difficulty class again, what you're doing is adding that d20 to the first one and coming up with a sum. Now be advised, open rolling works in both directions. This is something I've been fond of ever since I played Iron Crown Enterprises MERP game. If you roll a 1, you're rolling another d20 and subtracting it from your score. If you roll a 20, you're rolling another d20 and adding it to your score. And be advised, although we normally only roll 1 extra d20 and add it, if you're rolling negatives and you roll another d20, it's kind of like that negative die replaced your original roll. You must roll another d20 and subtract it from the first negative total. I'll give you an example. The goal here is to have a range generated between, on the dice naturally, negative 40 to plus 40. So if I roll a 20 and I roll another 20 positively, I have my plus 40. If I roll a 1, I roll a d20, that becomes my new negative die roll, right? And let's say I roll a 20 on that negative die, I now have negative 20, I roll again, I get another 20, I now have my negative 40. Now when would you use this? You use this whenever skill tests are being made. It is not applied to saving throws. I suppose a narrator could apply it to saving throws if you're trying to resist a skill like willpower against seduction, but normally I would see this as any skill test you're attempting for dramatic effect. The example I wrote in the guide was, you say you have a dwarf trying to break down a door. Although this isn't a skill test, it is a kind of test. He ends up rolling a 1. His new roll is a 9, so now he has a -9, right? He adds a strength modifier. He's a really strong boy. He's got a +4. He ends up with a total -5. He not only fails to get through that door, he alerts all the opponents on the other side of it that he tried, and they all go on alert, and now you've lost your surprise round. This is why I like this system, because if you roll really badly, bad things happen to you. It makes every roll important. Now, let's say you're trying something the opposite way. Let's say you're trying to, I don't know, get information out of a secretary. This is a popular I like to use in noir games. You roll a d20, you end up scoring a 20. Hey, good for you. Now, in regular D&D, that would be a success. The secretary would tell you something useful. But in the confirming system, you roll another d20. Let's say you roll a 15. You now have a 35 base. And the secretary was a little resistant. She didn't really want to talk, so the difficulty was 20. So now you're 15 points over the target number by the die roll. And then you're suave. You've got a +2 charisma. And you've got some diplomacy and some bluff. You've got, like, say, +5 ranks. 7 and 15 makes 23. You are way over the target number. She only tells you tidbits of information you need to know. She tells you other things that lead to other clues that can either be side adventures, maybe you get her number, maybe you discover something about the target you didn't know before that could be used to give you a different option to solve the issue. This is why I like this system too, because if you roll really well, the story can change, and in monumental ways. Now, we call this range degrees of success. I often abbreviate this to DOS. The DOS system we use for Dungeonpunk runs as follows. The worst result, -10 points or more below the difficulty class, is called Go Bust. Go Bust is the worst possible result. You've not only failed, you need to make the situation as the narrator worse for the entire party or team. The example I gave in the guide was, let's say you're having something social happen at a party and you roll a -10 Go Bust. The host of the party only thinks bad about you. They think bad about everybody who arrived with you. If you're trying to hide, you not only alert the foes to where you are, you alert them to the entire party. If you're trying to pick a lock, you not only set the trap off, you set the trap off, and the saving throw, perhaps, to avoid it goes up tremendously for the entire party. Fumble is the next worst result. This runs from -5 to -10. Oh, let me give you an example too. Going back to Go Bust, if the target number was 10, you would go bust on a total result of 0 or less. If the target number is 10 and you're looking at a fumble result, that would be any result of 1 to 5, right? This result hurts the individual and makes them suffer for their loss. An example would be making a climb check and dropping something valuable. Breaking an item you're wrestling over. Insulting someone so badly that you lose a Steam rating, which is a social convention in Dungeonpunk. I originally had this idea also that some spells are skill tests, such as a ritual. So let's say you have someone casting a ritual and they roll this. Interrupt that spellcaster, boys. Interrupt that spellcaster. The spell might end up hitting them rather than go off correctly, right? Or might accidentally anger the entity they are summoning if it's a summation. If you're sneaking up on somebody, it would warn them that you're behind them and that there is a threat, rather than just something's there, right? Failure, -1 to 4. If the target number is 10, you fail on a 6 to a 9. This would be the typical D&D failure. You're sneaking up on somebody, you roll a 6, they spin around looking for who's behind them. They don't necessarily know you're there, but they know something's up. If you're lying to someone, they know you're lying, but they don't know why. If you're trying to pick somebody's pocket, you miss the item. They might not have caught you, though, on a failure. They would catch you on a fumble, but on a failure, they know that someone tried to pick their pocket. They're just not sure who yet. And this can get into some other narrator tricks, like maybe giving the person a fate check to see if it's you failed but no one caught you. That's an option there too that I might sometimes engage. I encourage the narrator sometimes engage. Partial success. If the target number is 10, you have a partial success from 10 to 14. The range is 0 to +4. This is you succeeded but just barely, right? There's some complication to the success. The narrator may or may not ask you to make a fate test to see if something happens. A good example would be like, let's say you're climbing a wall and you get a partial success. The narrator may have you make a fate check to see if it takes you an extra round to get up over the wall. If you're trying to lift something out of someone's pocket, the narrator may have you make a fate test to see if they detect the item missing a few rounds later, right? Or they may have you make a fate test to see if, yeah, you lifted that, but somebody was watching. Make another roll to see if they caught you. That kind of thing. Partial success shows up in some of the games I've played in the past, and it can be tricky to adjudicate. But my general rule of thumb is don't do anything that would grievously punish the player, but do something they might have to deal with. For instance, if your character's lying to their spouse because they don't want their spouse to know what they're up to because it could endanger the spouse. The spouse believes you, but then the GM might have you make a fate check to see if a few moments later they get a little suspicious or they file it away about why was this an issue to begin with. So you may have a social thing you have to deal with later because of that, right? Or perhaps if you talk your way past a guard, a few rounds later he starts thinking over what you said and he tells it to the next guard who relieves him, and that guard may or may not believe it. Things like that. Success. +5 to +9. If the target number is a 10, that you would succeed on a 15 to a 19. This is the standard D&D success. You're completely successful what you're trying to attempt. If you're trying to get information out of a secretary, she gives you the information you need, but only that information. If you're trying to pick a lock, you're through the door. Critical success. +10 to +15. If the target number is 10, that means you need at least a 20. You succeed, and you also get some advantage out of it. For instance, in the lock example, not only you through the door, you didn't leave behind any trace that was ever picked. If you're interrogating someone, you not only know what they're lying about, but you can deduce why they're lying. An example, the secretary. Yeah, I like this one a lot from Film Noir. She only gives you the information. She might also, give you her number, tell you something else in the business about when it's active, when it's not. So if you come back later and burgle the place, you now have that intel. Or tell you something about the target you didn't know. That could be used later in the adventure as an alternate way to solve the adventure, or perhaps as a little blackmail. Detectives aren't above that sometimes. Ask Sam Spade. Then we have the ultimate success for Dungeonpunk. Dramatic/heroic success, +16 or more. In the case of a target number of 10, this would be a 26 or better. This is the highest form of success possible. My players from my first Dungeonpunk game will remember that scene in the Belladonna in Time when Ruth's Goblin Bard was playing and the crowd suddenly got wild and out of control. That's because Ruth scored 2 confirming dice that were +16 or more higher than the willpower of the crowd, which means the emotional state of the crowd went through the roof. This is why we had that riot. Other examples from movies would be things like, actually not even movies, let me go to a play. Mark Antony's speech in Julius Caesar by Shakespeare. That'd be an example of heroic success. Selling the whole mood of Rome shifts, right? Another good example would be Tyrion Lannister's speech at the Siege of King's Landing in Game of Thrones. They're all dejected. They all think we're all going to die. And he gives them a speech about what's at stake. And then ends it with a very brave line of, there's some brave men on that door, knocking on that door. Let's go kill them. And suddenly you have this fanatic mob rush out of King's Landing and just decimate everyone attacking the city. In the case of a magical device, you might end up completely decoding it, having complete knowledge of its functions, and actually gain like a +2 to use that device from then on. In the case of interrogating someone, you might not only know what they were lying about and why, but you might be able to trip them up so they don't realize you know, or that they confessed. And in the case of the secretary, you might give her the first level of, interest. Or find something out about her employer that's so damning you can blackmail him forever. This is the big one. This is the one you want, and players are going to try to abuse the system to get that to happen. I'm okay with that, because this system also applies to the NPCs. Now, I've always liked this kind of open rolling more than the flat 20 is always success and 1's always a failure rule. I'm going to go back to the game for a second that we just ran, because to me it feels more realistic. There was a scene in our first session where Ruth's goblin ducked out of the belladonna in time and was trying to hide from the fight. There were 2 people outside. They both rolled a 20 originally. Now, Ruth's total to get out that door was a 25. The confirming dice, one of them was only a 3. So that guy missed her. The next guy had a 12. He has a 32. He saw her. This meant that rather than there be 2 AOOs she was provoking by walking out that door, there was only 1. And this is why I like this, because in my years of playing 3.0 and 3.5, I have seen so many natural 20s just show up freakishly. I've seen so many critical hits just show up freakishly, especially on scimitars and rapiers. It can ruin a very carefully planned out encounter. Now, I'm not saying you don't want those dramatic moments. You don't want those occasional hits that make everyone go, oh my god, or those occasional skill rolls that change the game. But doing open rolling makes the reverse just as possible as the positive result we want. And that, I feel, balances this out better. Now, when I spoke about players and wanting to push things, let's talk about Fate. Fate is a new saving throw in the system. It is placed just under the core 3 saving throws from the game. Hold on, got a page ahead to it. Player characters have a thing called a Fate bonus, and certain races have bonuses to this also. Half-elves and halflings, for instance, have an extra +1 Fate bonus on top of this chart you're seeing right now. At levels 1 to 3, your bonus is a 0. At levels 4 to 6, it's a +1. At levels 7 to 9, it's a +2. Levels 10 to 12, it's a +3. Levels 13 to 15, it's a +4. Levels 16 to 19, it's a +6. Levels 20 to 22, it's a +8. And level 23 ends with a +10. That is the highest it ever goes. You'll see a second entry on the table called Kissed by Fate. Levels 1 to 3, you have 3 uses of Kissed by Fate. Levels 4 to 6, you have 4. Levels 7 to 9, you have 5. Levels 10 to 12, you have 6. Levels 13 to 15, you have 7. Levels 16 to 19, you have 8. Levels 20 to 22, you have 9. And level 23 or higher, you have 10 Kissed by Fate uses, which is as high as that ever goes. The difference between these two things is as follows. Fate bonus is added to any test you're trying to pass when you expend a Kissed by Fate, 1 use of it. In addition to that bonus, you roll a d6. This mechanic comes from the Star Wars D20 game that Wizards of the Coast had for a while. This greatly increases the chances of a pass. But we're not done. Because if you expend 2 Kissed by Fate, rather than that be a d6, it becomes a d20 confirming die automatically, and you get the bonus. This is huge. Be careful using this, though, because whenever you push your luck, which is what this is called, you must make a Fate saving throw test of DC 15. If you fail the attempt, the situation becomes worse in some minor way. An example would be as you push your Fate on a stealth roll, you don't get the DC 15, you flub something, maybe you fall down and skin your hand, leaving behind a blood trail, maybe you fall and lose your money pouch, or a valuable tool goes skittering. If you fumble or go bust, something goes majorly wrong for you or for the party. For instance, on the stealth check, the guard immediately spins around and detects you. For the party, that guard happens to be a wizard with a wand of mass sleep. Yeah. You can push your luck as many times a game session or a game week as your character has Kissed by Fate uses listed above. Now, here is something else we do with the Fate system. It's called provoking lucky events. This requires only one Kissed by Fate use. You then test provoke a possible lucky event. These events can't, in and of themselves, damage a foe or incapacitate them, but they can put some kind of story barrier in the way. This has a variable fate save, depending on how likely the event would be, which is going to involve some give or take between the player and the narrator. For instance, let's say you're trying to escape a guard and you're running across rooftops. You don't think you make the jump check, so you declare you want a lucky event of a plank across two of the buildings. The narrator thinks about it and goes, it's actually pretty likely that that would be there, so we're going to make this easy. Give me a Fate DC of 10. You then roll your Fate saving throw, and if you succeed, that lucky break is there. You get to the other side, you kick the plank out of your way just as the guard steps on it and falls down into the alley below, no longer chasing you. Since we've said it can't directly harm somebody, he catches a clothesline, he lands in a barrel full of hay, something happens that he doesn't get hurt, but he's no longer in the chase. Now this is meant to add drama, so at times the narrator may decide to complicate your lucky event. Yeah, you've got it, but... And that's fair because what the player's doing is taking over the story, right? In the case of the plank, the example I wrote was the narrator has you make a reflexes check to see if you get over to the other side before that rotted plank, which you didn't declare was in good condition, breaks. The narrator also has some points they can use, which we're going to go into in a little bit later, to make the player's life complicated. I wanted this for Dungeonpunk because since it focuses on criminals and ne'er-do-wells, they really do live by their luck. And there needs to be something about that becomes a game mechanic, and this is what I chose. Now, something else about fate. Advantage and disadvantage. If you've listened to any 5th ed games, you've heard about advantage and disadvantage, and this is one of the most contentious things that has happened in D&D, other than the DEI woke scandal we have going on right now. We're going to allow advantage and disadvantage, but it requires a push your luck test. You have to spend a fate. You have to spend a Kiss by Fate. However, like the normal system, you don't have to make the fate check for it. You must, however, have a good reason to explain why you have advantage or disadvantage. Okay? For instance, let's say the player's plan to rob a building is so good and so tight that they say to the GM, we think we should get advantage for this. And the narrator says, you know what? I agree. This is huge because this is what it's going to do. Advantage in 5th ed allows you to roll 2 dice and keep the one you prefer. We're going to keep that mechanic. So in all the skill tests for advantage, for all the saving throws, for all the attack rolls, you'd roll 2d20 and keep the best one. That is huge. And that's why I'm saying it requires a Kissed by Fate, and the narrator has to agree. This can greatly speed up certain scenes in the game. By giving the narrator the control to agree, it keeps it from being abused. Now, the reverse of this. Remember earlier when I said the narrator had some things they could do to complicate the players' lives? In 5th ed, that's called disadvantage. the GM will say, hey, you're trying to do this. You're wearing all that armor, trying to sneak past him, roll disadvantage. Disadvantage is you roll 2 dice and keep the worst one, right? We're going to allow the narrator to do that. And the disadvantage takes effect unless the player it's directed at expends a Kissed by Fate use. This gives the player a way to get around the narrator trying to, I know they're going to think of it as punishing them, trying to complicate their die roll, but they have to give something up to make it happen. Or they can take their chances. Again, this is a game about criminals and pushing your luck. How well do you trust your luck? The narrator is limited to doing this, however, a certain number of times during the game session / game week. And basically that's going to be equal to a number of times equal to the average level of the party. So if you've got a bunch of first level characters, the narrator can only do this once, right? Further, to keep it from being abused, we're going to make that the average level of the party divided by 2 and rounded up. So the party averages 8th level. That would allow the narrator to call disadvantage 3 times in a session. And note that that's in total, not against each individual player. This way the narrator is going to center these bad luck moments on critical moments of the game, such as a moment when, if the player fails, all the town watch might know they did what they were up to, right? Or the big uber bad might spin around and suddenly see them. These can be moments of high drama or high comedy, and that's what they're intended for. One other thing we're going to talk about fate is how fate tests are rolled, because this can be a little confusing to people who are used to thinking only high numbers. Got a page down to it. Give me a second, guys. I would pause, but every time I pause, my Audacity for some reason just stops recording. Okay, so sometimes the GM will call for a fate check. GM narrator will call for a fate check or a luck check to see if something's going on in the environment or could possibly happen to the players. For instance, the players decide that they are going to go walk down this street to get to the target, right? And the sage GM narrator decides that there is a chance, because of where they're walking, they might encounter somebody who knows them, who doesn't like them. The narrator then has to ask themselves, how likely is that event? We define this as complications or benefits. A very minor complication, the players have to roll a 10 to avoid it. A minor complication, a 15 to avoid it. A complication, a 20 to avoid it. A serious complication, a 25 to avoid it. And something that's nearly insurmountable, a 30. But the reverse is also true. If we're looking for a benefit, how likely are those to occur? Right? And the numbers kind of reverse. So let's say, I think I read the chart wrong. Oh, I did. I'm sorry. I read the benefit numbers first. I'm sorry. Let me go back. So a very minor benefit, 10 DC or higher. Minor benefit, 15. A suitable benefit, a 20. A serious benefit, a 25. And something that's just going to really help you, a 30 or better. So if the sage is trying to see if the watch is all on break that day, that would be like a 25 or better fate check for the players. But then the reverse is also true. Complications, the complication severity, the more intense it is, the harder it is to beat. The more likely it is to beat. So a very minor complication would be a 30, a minor complication, a 25, a complication, a 20, a serious complication, a 15, and nearly insurmountable complication, a 10. So for instance, if the players are trying to get past a guard, The narrator might decide, there's going to be a very minor complication here. A kid walks out into the street and starts bouncing his ball off the wall. Roll fate 30 or better to keep that kid from being there. A serious complication, 15 or better to avoid, would be the level 10 watch captain walks into the street and starts talking to the guard you're trying to sneak past. And a nearly insurmountable one would be the Grand Archmage of the Watch happens to be patrolling the street that day. See how that's going to work? This again represents the luck that's going on and exactly what might or might not complicate your intents and purposes. The narrator is encouraged to do this somewhat sparingly. I would say once every 3 or 4 scenes. For instance, you finally get to the target you're going to break into, this building, and the players have laid out their plan. You might have them roll a fate check to see if there's anything they forgot. Right? Like, what if there's a servant that really doesn't like her master? And she happens to be on work that day. Well, that would be a benefit, right? So, since she could open all kinds of doors and all kinds for you, that would be a major benefit. Roll a 25 for better fate. See if that's so. And then the reverse is also true. Maybe there's a servant on work that day that absolutely adores their master. 15 or better to avoid, because that would be complication. The complications being more severe than the benefits, it may seem a little odd, but that way you don't always have the grand eye muckety muck, right? Just happen to be there at the narrator's discretion. Nor do you have the street just happen to be empty of everything when the players want it to be that way. The players, this would be a nearly insurmountable option. The players have to get a 30 and the narrator would have to get a 10 on those 2 examples. Well, have to roll lower than 10 for those 2 examples to take place. See what I mean? Sorry, higher than 10. Now, I know that can be a little confusing, but after a little gameplay, it'll make sense. Benefits should be harder to manifest, hence why their DCs are higher. Complications are easier to avoid so long as they're extreme. But minor complications are harder to avoid, which is why their DCs are higher. Think of every crime movie you've ever seen where they get to the score, they get something done, it's all going according to plan, and then all of a sudden, something's not where it should be. Right? You see that more often than you see, hey, not only are you breaking in, but everybody went on leave that day. Okay, so that is open rolling and fate. I hope that makes things more clear, and I will see you in the next video.